Hello YouTubers! My name's Willie, and welcome to my channel. Today I have for you Reaction Request 171, and this is a continuation of the Bloodlines 2 lore by Arch Warhammer, the Toreador. And this was requested by Brutality616. So, let's check it out. In 3, 2, 1, play. Dun dun. Dun dun. Dun 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 dun.
The Toreador, a truly ancient clan with descendants stemming all the way back to the first city founded by Cain himself. They have always been one of the high clans of vampire society, and yet they are also one of the least martial of all the clans. How did a clan like the Toreador, filled with painters, sculptors, and artists of all kinds, survive all the way up until the modern knights? Well, that is the question we will be answering today, as well as a deeper look into the Toreador clan. Firstly, let us investigate what makes the Toreador so very special, so unique when compared to all of the other clans. And that is undoubtedly their focus upon artistic pursuit, upon beauty in all its myriad forms, over the other clans' often more practical pursuits. But despite the obvious differences, the Toreador's pursuit of beauty is in many ways the same as the Bruiser's pursuit of overthrowing the status quo. It is a part of the clan, a part of their blood, a secret buried so deep within their DNA that they simply cannot resist. But at the very same time, it is also a very different drive, because of course art and beauty are extraordinarily subjective terms. What one man might find to be the pinnacle of modern art, another might view as nothing more than pointless speckles of paint on an otherwise pristine canvas.
Indeed.
As you may imagine, an entire clan based on such a subjective idea as art or beauty is prone to a great deal of infighting. And the Toreador most certainly are. The main clan is divided into several smaller factions, all huddling around their various preferred art forms. They may also divide themselves into broader factions, based, for example, on the more classical arts, or the newer arts, which are often rejected by the elders. There are also more extreme factions that have, on occasion, been outright antagonistic with the main Toreador clan. For example, the Toreador anti-tribu, the ones who rejected the Camarilla and instead chose to join the Sabbat. The Toreador anti-tribu have a very different definition of beauty than most, not just Toreador, but most in general. The Toreador anti-tribu sees beauty in pain, in suffering, in debasement and depravity. And the strict regulations of the Camarilla and the enforcement of the Masquerade does not serve their purposes overly well. There is also another faction that refer to themselves as the Volgiri. These are a quite different form again, even compared to the Toreador or the anti-tribu. Whilst they are flesh-crafters and see beauty in the macabre, the repugnant and the ugly, suffering and pain is not necessarily a part of their art, if you wish to call it so. Art is, after all, a very subjective thing, but with the Volgiri's preference to carry out their art on those things that are still alive, well, I think most of us can probably agree that it's pushing the definition just a bit. Although the Tsimish are, of course, great fans of the Volgiri. And there is even an Islamist version of the Toreador, the Re'in al-Fi'in. This is a rather interesting one, and also the one with the greatest schism, verging on an internal civil war. Unsurprisingly so for anyone with an understanding of fundamentalist Islam. The elders of this clan are of the opinion that all art deserve respect and preservation, even art depicting heretical idols and those worshipping lost religions. The younger generations, of course, take a somewhat more, well, Islamic approach to things, to be honest, and are of the opinion that anything that is outside of Islam is obviously heretical and must be destroyed. But how has such a splintered clan actually survived ever since the first city all the way up to the modern knights? And not just survived, mind you, but prospered. The Toreador are a key pillar of the modern-day Camarilla, and even during the Dark Ages and the Renaissance, they were a considerable political power. Well, the simple answer to that is that the Toreador did not make themselves an easy target. Most of the time they operated from within the power structure of other organizations, which is why the Camarilla is such a perfect fit for them. Even during the ancient ages, when the Bruza were creating their dream of Carthage, the Toreador existed inside of Carthage, just like they existed within the walls of Rome and the Venture. And when they saw which way the wind was blowing, the Toreador never thought twice of jumping the sinking ship of Carthage and joining up with the Roman victors. And many say that the reason why the Venture chose to burn Carthage to the ground and then salt it was because of the tales brought along with the Toreador. They painted a picture of a city gone mad, filled with blood sacrifice and demomancy. And whilst this picture may certainly have been a tad bit embellished here and there, even the Bruza admit that there were some less than savoury aspects of Carthage. Regardless of the truth, the Toreador had now well and truly ingratiated themselves to the victor, and were allowed to enter Rome and its upper echelons of kindred society. And Rome would prove a kind and generous mistress to the Toreador. It was within the Roman Senate and palaces of emperors yet to come that the Toreador discovered and perfected their arts of statesmanship, intrigue, and politics. Growing to wield enormous power within Rome. And as that ancient empire slowly but surely began to crumble, the Toreador attached themselves to other new and fascinating power structures. And one amongst their kind was particularly intrigued by a new religion called Christianity. The Toreador in question was born Mikhail over 2,000 years before Christ died on the cross, and had later changed his name to Beshter after fleeing from the Akkadians. Upon discovering this new faith, however, he renamed himself once again as Michael, after the Christian archangel. And after having lived much of his life in Rome, he travelled to a place known as Byzank, along with his twin lovers Dracon and Antonius. They became religious symbols in this new area that was eventually happened upon by a mortal by the name of Constantine, who would later establish the city of Constantinople on the place of Byzank. Michael and his lovers would eventually rise to the top of Byzantine society, forming a religious triumvirate at the core of the city, with Antonius as the father, Dracon as the Holy Ghost, and Michael as the son. The three formed the core pillars of Constantinople society, and together they created what they referred to as the Dream, a vampire utopia founded on the city of Constantinople, filled with learning, culture, entertainment, enlightenment, and all manners of pleasures, both of the soul and of the flesh. Constantinople was a true paradise, inhabited not merely by the Toreador, but many of the other vampire clans as well, and was considered a truly wondrous achievement of vampire civilization. It would last for nearly 1,000 years until finally it came to an end during the Fourth Crusade,
Okay.
although the
What
city's
happened
doom
then?
had been heralded long before that. The alliance between Michael, Dracon, and Antonius, all fourth generation Methuselah vampires, had lasted for centuries. But the friction between the families eventually grew too dire, especially due to the actions of Antonius, who sought to impose a far stricter control over the actions of the vampires in Constantinople. He wished to hide their existence from the views of mortal eyes. His suggestion in many ways bore a certain resemblance to the masquerade of modern knights, although his execution would have been considerably more violent in nature,
Yeah.
and his extreme views at the time gained him many, many enemies, and his very existence had become a threat to the great dream that the three of them had created. And eventually, after much prodding and convincing, Michael and Draken agreed to sanction the death of Antonius, who was killed at the hands of one of his own by the name of Caius, who staked the vampire and left him outside to await the sunrise, destroying him utterly. But despite the apparent necessity of the act, Michael and Draken did not take the death of Antonius at all well. Draken became depressed and would eventually leave the city of Constantinople, and Michael would be driven insane. He would eventually come to think of himself not merely as a vampire who had adopted the name of Michael, but as the actual incarnation of the Archangel himself. Unfortunately for Michael, however, his delusions of grandeur could not save his dream, and he was killed during the Fourth Crusade, and the dream came to an end. Although many others, disciples of Michael and believers in the resurrection of the dream, have attempted to recreate it, usually without a whole lot in the way of success. However, the dream is not yet entirely dead. Dracon still lives, and whilst Michael was diablerized by Mary the Black, another vampire, can one truly diablerize an archangel? Perhaps the dream is not yet entirely dead, as long as two of its greatest servants still live. But that may be a tale for another time. Let us return to the Toreador in general, because it was not
Yes,
only Michael who
let's
saw the
return.
rise of Christianity as an opportunity. The Toreador in general were quite fond of the church, because it was one of the foremost patrons of the arts during the Dark Ages and the Renaissance. As such, a great deal of Toreadors made their way into the church's most holy service, as it would appear that crosses do not inherently have any effect upon vampires. Bear in mind, however, that this is a bit of an interesting thing. So, religious symbols can have an effect upon vampires, but it is not the symbols themselves that have this power. Rather, it is the so-called true faith of the symbol's wielder. This means that in the hands of a true believer, a cross can have an effect on a vampire, as can a Quran or a statuette of the Buddha. But a cross or any of these symbols alone have no effect, and so the Toreador could infiltrate the church with little to no problems. Additionally, they also grew very fond of the French courts, growing extremely influential in the courts of love. Because, of course, the French have, at least in my own humble opinion, always been degenerate perverts.
Yeah.
Perfect places for the Toreador to make their own little nests. And with so much influence at the French courts and with the papacy, the Toreador became one of the most powerful clans in all of kindred society. And eventually, all of that power and influence would coalesce in what is now known as the Camarilla. The Camarilla is an organization
Nice.
born by necessity. During the waning years of the Dark Ages, the vampire world was shocked by repeated attacks upon it, both by humanity in the form of the Inquisition and from within its very own ranks in the form of the First Anarch Revolt. To respond to these clear and present threats, many of the elder clans were gathering together to discuss the possibilities before them. Many advocated all-out war, not only against the Anarchs, but also against humanity. Many of the elders argued that humanity had grown too bold, too powerful, and too suspicious of the true nature of the kindred. And unless they were culled and brought into submission now, they might grow to become an existential threat to all vampires. And if it was not for the intervention of a mere fifth-generation Toreador, that may very well have become the true aim of the Camarilla. However, Rafael de Corazon had another idea. He argued that if war was to follow with the humans, a kindred victory was far from a foregone conclusion. The hordes of humanity had grown vast indeed, as had their technology and knowledge of weaponry. And to make matters worse, organizations like the Inquisition and various holy orders had become frighteningly proficient at providing kindred with the true death. And finally he stated that if a war was to break out, that would be the end of any attempt at subterfuge. Once the kindred were actively fighting the humans in open warfare, there would be no more hiding, there would be no more disguising their presence, and there would be no more lurking in human society, no more living in their castles or operating within their cities, no more benefiting of their ingenuity and constant improvement. And even if humanity was successfully enslaved to the cause of the kindred, Rafael de Corazon argued that such an action would crush their spirits, and with it their ingenuity and drive. Not to mention, of course, the dangers inherent in keeping a slave population. Many of the elders listening to Raphael's speech had lived for thousands upon thousands of years, and they had seen what a population raised to bondage could do if provided with enough fire. And so instead of this, instead of all-out war and risking everything that kindred society had grown to be so fond of and in some cases even reliant upon, Raphael presented the council with an alternative.
Oh,
He
what
reminded them of the
alternative?
6 traditions. The traditions that the elders and many of their brood had been breaking repeatedly and blatantly. The first of which was the masquerade, to hide the existence of vampires. The second, domain. A kindred's hunting ground is his territory. Progeny, sire only with the permission of your elders. Accounting, until children are released, their actions are the responsibility of their sire. Hospitality, honor the domains of others and present oneself to the ruler of any domain you visit. And finally, destruction. The right to kill kindred is reserved only for the elder of a community, and only they may call a blood hunt upon another kindred. Raphael urged the elders to reaffirm these old traditions, and to create, finally, a lasting alliance between vampire clans, the Camarilla, to enforce
Nice.
these traditions and keep control over kindred society. As such, they would rely upon subterfuge and stealth to continue to exist within human society rather than risk it all in an all-out war. Raphael's impassioned speech convinced virtually all of the elders present. And so, vampire society would, from the creation of the Camarilla, adopt a new doctrine. They would hide themselves from society, and they would enforce these rules to deadly consequence, if need be. And by so doing, the Camarilla would protect
Very
all
nice.
kindred,
Very nice.
whilst providing them
All
with
to
safety
protect
and
themselves.
prosperity. The fact that it would also bring all kindred under their de facto control, well, that was just a nice little bonus. And so the Toreador entered into the Victorian age, not diminished in power at all, but instead made even more important. Though the ensuing Industrial Revolution did cause quite the upheaval within Toreador society. The church, one of the primary sources of the clan's influence, began to become less important. And as the influence of the church began to wane, another religion began to take its place. The religion of which I speak, of course, is not one that is officially recognized, and yet one we all universally worship. Money. And what a prodigious quantity of it now flowed into the world. The Victorian Age and the Industrial Revolution allowed the common man to enjoy something that previously had been reserved only for the rich and powerful. Freedom, leisure time, and the ability to indulge in one's hobbies and desires. This, of course, was an even more golden age than the preceding one for the Toreador. Art, science, culture, music, writing, sculpturing, all of these things exploded. Since now, not only the rich and powerful could indulge in them, normal people would begin to buy paintings, admire them, and enjoy fine food and drink. For a clan like the Toreador, who are enraptured in all forms of art, beauty, decadence, and pleasure, this was a revolution in more ways than one, since not only was there more for them to enjoy, there were also more ways for them to directly influence the fields that they were so very fond of. Previously, only huge organizations like the church or courts could afford to become patrons of the arts. But in the modern nights, art is everywhere. Promising artists spring up by the dozens every day, be they songwriters, musicians, singers, painters, dancers. There is a nearly infinite amount of them, and the Toreador, being immortal and many of them having quite a few connections already, well, they found the art of making money to be no challenge at all. And indeed, in the modern nights, one of the biggest problems the Toreador face is that there are so many forms of art now, so many things to enjoy and indulge in, that the schisms it has created are starting to become a real problem within the clan. There are so many of them that enjoy so many different things that what was once friendly if spirited conversations and discussions at meetings and gatherings tend to become somewhat more heated. With many of the elders, for example, as we touched upon previously, simply outright rejecting certain new ideas and arts. 3D, for example, animation, modern cinema, or modern music. Many of these things are considered to be a little bit too crude for the refined senses of the elders of the clan, whilst, of course, also being embraced wholeheartedly by the younger generation. It almost reminds one of a similar schism that happened within the Bruiser, where the elders clung to traditions and the youngsters wanted something new, something interesting, something fiery. And so, despite the fact that the clan is at the absolute zenith of its power, it may also be standing on a crumbling precipice.
Nice.
And with that, I'll wrap up yet another clan video. I wish Paradox would take it a bit more easy on these ones. Hell, I'm busy enough with Vrax as it is, in addition to making some other content on occasion as well. This should just keep me quite busy. But you guys seem to enjoy it, so I see no reason to stop now. So, the Toreador, one little interesting thing that I feel I must point out. There are those out there who claim that the Toreador are the most human of all the clans, but I beg to differ. I still believe that that distinction belongs to the Tremere. Because, let's be honest here, ambition, drive, the wish to improve one's surroundings, one's situation, etc., that is a very fundamental human emotion. We all have it. You might succumb on occasion to apathy and hopelessness, sure, but the drive to improve one's lot in life is still, I would say, one of the most universal of human emotions. But the Toreador? Well, think of it. The Toreador are beautiful, perfect, vaunting creatures who value art and the pursuit of ephemeral pleasure above everything.
Yeah.
And they will pursue it at any cost, to the point that if they see a beautiful work of art, they can become so enamored with it that they completely lose track of time and place, to the point that if they see a particularly fancy vase in the middle of a firefight, they might simply just stand there, dumbstruck, and get shot at. That's a bit of an extreme reaction, isn't it? And of course, they constantly strive towards perfection as well. Now, ask yourselves, how many humans do you know that always strive towards nothing but perfection? That value something like art over virtually anything else? That value practically any ephemeral thing above such baser instincts as caring for oneself, one's family, etc. Like, who do you know that would rather starve than sell a particularly beautiful painting? To me, honestly, the Toreador remind me more of an idealized version of humanity. A version of humanity
Makes sense,
conjured
yes,
up by
yes.
an ancient creature that knew what it was to be human once, but has long since forgotten, and is also constrained by his current existence, lacking certain abilities, feelings, emotions, and senses that they once had as a human, and they have painted for themselves an idealized representation of what it was to be human, a perfect interpretation of what they once were, and so they are now striving to reach that perfect interpretation. This, I believe, is also one of the reasons why the Toreador occasionally suffer from burnout, where they will essentially find that nothing really stirs them anymore. No work of art, no matter how magnificent, no piece of music, no matter how stirring, can really evoke the same sensations and emotions. And when that happens to them, they tend to go quite batty indeed. And
Wow.
start seeking out considerably more extreme forms of stimuli. A touch of Slanesh in the world of darkness. At least, that's my take on them. But, hey, I'm hardly an expert on the world of darkness, so perhaps I am over-analyzing. As for why you would want to play a Toreador, well, why wouldn't you? They're awesome. I know I say that a lot, but see, Toreador are probably my, second favorite ones, because they are such social creatures. They focus far more on, diplomacy, of talking, on intrigue and these things, rather than just bashing something over the head with a pipe. I quite like that. I really love that in RPG as well, and Vampire the Masquerade, the first one, did a fantastic job of presenting you with that. There were on occasions in that game where you had to fight, but there was so much that you could solve with good old-fashioned diplomacy. Hell, a giant gargoyle monstrosity ambushes you, you can talk your way out of that. It might not be easy, but you can do it. And I really do love that aspect of the Toreador. Although, well, I would never play one in the RPG because, by God, if you've got a cuntish DM, oh my, oh Jesus, the ability to just be stricken by some form of beauty to the point of being rendered insentient is insane. I mean, the penalties were nasty the last time I saw them. Hell, I'm pretty sure that you can actually be outright stunned for minutes, if not hours at a time. Hell, just imagine the potential consequence of that if your DM says, oh hey, That's a real pretty painting over there. Maybe you should forget about the dude with the shotgun pointed at your face for a second and, really take it in. Oof. Yeah. Hell, that could be a really cool aspect of a game, though. Just have you be in trance with a painting to the point where you completely lose track of a conversation. That actually could be a really cool thing. And then you'd either have to be like, oh, yeah, sorry, boss. I was just lost in the blue eyes of the mozzarella over there or something. So I didn't hear a damn thing. Could you repeat that? Which could result in the guy either repeating it or, getting really, really, really angry with you.
Kicking your butt.
Could be interesting, certainly. Could also feel like one fuck of a dick move, but hey. Details, details. In fact, I might do a Toreador as my playthrough of VTM2. I will, of course, be playing that on the channel, obviously, but I think for my personal enjoyment playthrough that I'll do just by myself, I'll be picking a Venture. Obviously, the Venture are my favorites. I mean, come on. Noble shitbags that value their lineage and pride above everything else, even at the expense of others? Oh yeah, abso-bloody-lutely. Hell, maybe I'll even put it up to a vote and let you guys decide which clan I'll play. That'll be funny. I'll probably be Timish or Gangrel or something. Could be funny in its own way, though. Anywho, until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Until then, have a good day.
You too. Well, just being stuck standing at a painting, watching it. Okay, things that I found out, things that I learned. Well, you've got, quite a bit here actually. Apparently they date all the way back to the first city of Cain. They're special because their drive is art and beauty, possibly even perfection in such pursuits. Prone to infighting because, well, how subjective art is in itself. He talked about groups like the Anti-Tribune, Beauty and Pain, Vulgaire, Beauty and Macabre, and the Gruesome. And then he started talking about how they survived by making themselves not an easy target, by meshing themselves in other groups such as Greek and the First City, and then the split off. Eventually tying themselves to the church. Around that time you had a set of 3 old vampires. One of them had changed their name several times, ending on Michael for the religious Christians' sake. They're in Constantinople. And Antony's wanted to hide. The other two Dracon and Michael decided to kill Antinous, but it was really hard on them. And even though Michael was eventually killed after going completely nuts, he still was absorbed, so he might still be around, in a sense. And then, Dracon still lives out there in the world somewhere. The church offered sanction and protection under their art that they brought into it, which revealed that religious symbols had only some effects, only if the faith was strong of the person wielding such artifact. They came together and they were debating war, but Raphael talked about how we should enforce the old traditions, the 6 traditions and went through those 6 traditions and talked about how when this was endorsed, they could protect each other. But there's other, sneaky stuff about that. They began to worship money instead of the church when the church started declining and people started gaining their freedom for such activities, because there was artists that they could invest in popping up everywhere, and that brings them up to the modern day. And I could just see their influence all over the place would be incredible. Because here's all these young artists, they'd be picking and choosing who succeeds, and they'd be able to get into every corner of society just based on that. Anyways, this was part of Arch Warhammer's Bloodline 2 lore series. And there is a link in the description to help you find him. And this was requested again by Brutality616. Thank you for requesting this. I think I'm going to leave it there. Willie, out.
If you liked the video, stay tuned for more content. And as always, feel free to leave a comment. Have a good one.
Let us die together.